Banks want you to do what they say, not what they do. That was a moment that I will never forget. Is in order to get to any level of financial success or freedom, you have to emulate the people that understand how money works. And there's no better business model, as Nelson would tell you, than the banking industry. So do what they do, not what they say.
Joey, thanks for joining us today. We want to get started by hearing your story and how you discovered the infinite banking concept.
I'll tell you this. My good friend, Russ Morgan, we're at church together in Sunday school. And for years, I was in the mortgage business. He was a financial planner. And I don't know if you're familiar with that kind of whole world, but that's like a perfect referral situation. You know, like, hey, I'm a mortgage guy. I want referrals. I go to financial planners. They're supposed to refer me. Well, for the longest time, he would never give a referral to me, even though we were good friends, because they had an in-house mortgage kind of relationship. Well, that went away in 2009, right around the financial crisis. And one day he's like, hey, I want to start referring you some business. But in order for you to do that, you got to read this book. And here's the book, by the way. If you're not watching this on YouTube, you need to check it out. It's kind of torn and tattered at this point. But he said, you got to read this book. I'm like, no brainer. This is the pathway to get to referrals. So of course he's like, by the way, that's going to be $20. I'm like, are you serious right now? Like, you're going to charge me to read a book? And I'm like, this guy must not be doing very well. You know, like he must be hard up for some money if he's going to charge me. Anyway, long story, that was the kind of moment. If he had not charged me, I probably wouldn't have read it, let's be honest. But I did. And and I was like, light bulbs just started going off. Because here I am, I work for Wells Fargo Bank, and this book is saying, you need to become the banker. You need to take on the role of banker in your own life, where I had been just like everybody else, abdicating that to Wall Street and big banks in my life. And that wasn't getting me anywhere. I mean, let's be honest. We were part of the hamster wheel that is the American dream, and it was not working out. So this was it was an answer to prayer, to be honest.
You weren't just a mortgage broker. You work for a major retail commercial bank. How long did you do that for?
Yeah, I was doing that at the time. That was in 2009. So I must have been doing that for about 6 years at the time. I ended up working for them total for 11 years.
Were you successful?
I mean, you know, I would say so. In fact, I would, you know, whenever I finally decided to leave that mortgage industry to start teaching people about infinite banking, I was totally prepared that, and I openly tell people this, I was making over $300,000 a year in the mortgage business in my late 20s. And I thought, that's pretty good. Like I didn't expect to be doing that. But I knew once this really became a part of my life that I had to tell people about it. It was like I was compelled. And I was actually sitting at one of the Nelson Nash Institute think tanks in 2014, which, by the way, David, I still, I don't know if I've openly thanked you, but I think you gave me the pass that I wasn't supposed to be there because I wasn't a practitioner, but you were like, okay, well, you can come with Russ. That's fine. And I don't know if you even remember this, but you let me come. Of course, I paid, but I was there, and I was sitting there, and it's over and over and over people getting up on stage and sharing how they're impacting people with this concept. And then partner that with me having been a client for 4 years, implementing this into my family. I got this just this moment where I was like, why are people not doing this at a high level? Like, why are there not more people out there doing this? And I look around the room, and the think tank is where all of these practitioners are joined up, but there's only like 300 people in the room. And I'm like, this is all of North America? These are the only people that are out there? I was like, clearly there's not enough people that are essentially given the ability to do this, like who are certified to teach this. I need to be one of these people. And it was like God was putting his thumb in my back and he was like, why don't you do it? And then my immediate, response to the Lord was, well, I kind of make a lot of money doing something else. Like, I don't know if I want to take that leap. Here, my wife is pregnant with our fourth daughter on the way, and she doesn't work. I'm the only one working in the home. And I'm like kind of scared to make this career leap. At the time, I guess I was 34. But then that just started the ball. And, 6 months later, I was certified practitioner and I was out there, had to go cold turkey from making what I was in the mortgage business to zero overnight. And man, had I not had my infinite banking system set up with multiple policies, I would have not had the confidence to make that leap. That's the reality.
After you read the book for the first time, being in the banking industry, what was your first thoughts about the book?
Well, first off, I didn't understand it. I mean, I was like, the only thing that I understood is I went into the numbers, because that's what bankers do, right? Bankers and the banking industry teaches you to look at numbers, interest rates, rate of return, right? The terms of everything. That's how they train you to think. And so all this stuff about human behavior that Nelson was talking about at the beginning, I'm like, okay, are we going to ever get to like something of value here? Like this is dumb. And I mean, obviously now looking back, Nelson was more wise to help people to learn how to think, to learn how to manage the human behaviors, because without those, the numbers don't matter, right? But yeah, my initial thought was, okay, I don't fully understand it. These numbers make sense and I'm intrigued. And oh, by the way, I like this a lot better than Wall Street, because I was sitting there in the mortgage business and I was making all this money, but I had access to none of it, right? It was being put away in 401ks. It was being put into IRAs. It was all in these things that I didn't understand, I didn't control, I didn't have access to, and I thought I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I was following the default, like you start a job, they hand you a document that says, hey, here are your benefits, and by the way, where do you want your dollars for 401k to go, and how much do you want to send? And it was just a default, right? But I was making more money than I anticipated, and I didn't feel any closer to financial success or financial freedom, as we talk about a lot now. Is, man, I was no further from go. And so this book was like, here's the alternative that I didn't know existed.
So when did you first meet Nelson?
I don't know the exact date, but I want to say it was early in 2010 here in Birmingham at one of the locations where he would do his regular kind of conference or meetings. It was like a 2 to 3 day type of time frame. And I mean, I was blown away by his presentation. He was always an excellent orator and speaker and engaging, and his delivery was just ridiculous. Like he knew exactly how to say the same jokes over, and I laughed every time. I mean, I probably watched it 10 times in person over the years, but that was my first interaction. And I'll tell you, when I first met him, I thought the thing that got me the most is he shared a packet with everybody, and it was about from slavery to slavery, from what was it? From something to Babylon
to Egypt.
Yeah. And I just remember the wisdom that Nelson showed in that just one thing really caused me to, one, trust what he was saying, even though I didn't understand it all. Like the first time you hear this, you don't understand it. You're kind of like intrigued, but you're like, this is totally different. But once he shared that with me and I read through it, I thought, man, this man has a level of wisdom that I protect, like I would love to have at some point. And so I'm gonna follow what he's saying.
Did you come up against any arguments, any pushback on this concept when you were first looking into it and, talking to other people in the financial world? What were some of the arguments against it?
First and foremost, it has to do with cash value life insurance. Like, you couldn't come up with a more taboo financial instrument at the time. I mean, now I think it's gotten more and more acceptable or interesting because people are starting to wake up to how it's used in this concept. But man, at the time, I mean, my only influence was like the Dave Ramseys of the world, and just the idea that you would put money in whole life insurance. What a terrible vehicle. They use words like, what a terrible investment, which we all know is not what infinite banking is about. And whole life insurance is not an investment. It's a vehicle, a savings vehicle. But the biggest story I remember when I was reading this book, I went around to the bank presidents, the regional vice president, the business bankers, all the people at Wells Fargo that I had friendships with and would receive referrals from and so on. And I was like, hey, what do you guys think of this book? Like this idea that they're talking about using cash value life insurance, whole life insurance as a vehicle to take over the banking function in your life. Not one of them said it was a good idea. In fact, they all told me like that is the worst place. Nobody puts money in those things. And I thought it was comical, especially after the fact, because Russ and I were meeting and even Nelson shares some of this, is we pulled up the balance sheet of Wells Fargo at that time and realized that they had almost $20 billion in cash value life insurance on their books, almost twice what they had in real estate holdings. Like they had about 11 billion in real estate. And I thought, wait a minute, the guys, and here's the other part, the people I was asking were the ones being insured by the bank. They had life insurance policies against their lives as is corporate-owned life insurance or bank-owned life insurance, and they had no clue that their employer was putting so much money into cash value life insurance. And I thought, okay, and if you're listening to this, write this down. Banks want you to do what they say, not what they do. And that was a moment that I will never forget, is in order to get to any level of financial success or freedom, you have to emulate the people that understand how money works. And there's no better business model, as Nelson would tell you, than the banking industry. So do what they do, not what they say.
Well, do what they do, not what they say. Yeah, the snakes and the dragons, right? You're your best friend until they're not your best friend.
100%.
Yeah.
So what happens? Like, so when you left Wells Fargo, talk to us about, what those next steps were in where you got to where you are today.
Well, the funny thing is immediately, because, you asked the question, were you successful in it? Because I had built up, a long-term kind of referral relationship with a lot of real estate agents and people in the local area, when they heard that I quit the mortgage industry overnight, immediately their question was, one, what's wrong, right? Something must have happened. Or two, when I told them, yeah, I'm going to be sharing people about this infinite banking concept, they were immediately wanted to hear about it, right? They all wanted to meet because they're like, for this guy to leave what he was doing so well at, there must be something to this. And a lot of people were hungry for the same thing. They wanted access to cash. They wanted a savings vehicle that gave them options. And let's be real, in the real estate industry, many do not have any sort of like a retirement or passive income strategy. They just are caught on this commission cycle. I have to go buy a home, sell a home, buy a home, sell a home, like constantly. And sadly, I even saw many people I worked with take their last listing appointment and then die the next week. I mean, it was to the point where they had zero plan that made sense for them. And so I really kind of honed in on the people that I worked with and loved the most and said, hey, here's an alternative that's helped me and my family. I'd love for you to consider it, as a means for you. And a lot of people were like, yeah, I mean, this makes perfect sense. And thank you for bringing it to me, kind of thing. So that was really encouraging to know that I'd made this leap and that I wasn't crazy. This is something that a lot of people also saw the value in.
You and Russ Morgan are working together. Tell us a little bit about that and how that relationship. So you said you knew each other from church. How did y'all go from, friends to colleagues?
Well, like I said, he was originally my coach. He shared the book with me. We met multiple times to kind of understand what my biggest questions and hurdles were about the concept. We implemented several policies within the first year. And this is something I think is a kind of an applicable takeaway. If you're considering infinite banking, a lot of people are like, well, I don't know. I don't know how much to start with. I don't know, what's too much, what's too little. I liken it to if you consider it like a tunnel, right? If you're at one end of the tunnel and you look at the other end, there's only so much light, right? You can just see a little bit and it looks good. So you're going to start heading that way. That to me was my first policy. It's like all I could see was, how I can apply it to my first one. Actually, I had to do with giving. I was giving to different organizations and I was like, I'm going to apply this policy to this one thing, which was naive because banking is much bigger than one aspect, but it got me started. Well, as I started walking down that tunnel, which I would liken that to being educated, going to see Nelson multiple times, going to think tanks, meeting with my coach multiple times, all these other things started to make sense. And that's where my second and my third policies came very shortly thereafter, because I was like, oh, wait a minute. There's a lot more light at the end of the tunnel. The closer you get, the bigger it becomes. And so anyways, long story, we built several policies together. I started implementing this. And then, like I said, 4 years later, I decided to leave the industry and go work with Russ. And we really kind of partnered on a lot of cases because I really needed that mentor to help me with some of the logistical things that I didn't fully understand. And so the more we did that, the more we realized we worked really well together and decided to partner on Wealth Without Wall Street. That's led to a podcast, that's led to a community, the whole 9 yards. And, if you're interested in that sort of thing, we now apply it to passive income because that's been our application of the infinite banking concept, is to buy assets that produce cash flow so that we can get more of our time back. And so that's been the way in which we've grown the most.
Most people don't understand the connection between passive income and whole life insurance, So their immediate thought process, well, if somebody dies, I get a beneficiary check, and that's passive income. No, that's not what we're talking about. No.
In fact, Nelson says that in his book. Like, he would never regard retirement. Like, that was a bad word in his vocabulary, which I completely agree with. Like, it's not in the Bible anywhere. But he would call it passive income time, right? When you're not supposed to be so active, you want your assets to start working for you. And by the way these policies are designed are hand in hand with that, right? If you've bought assets along the way, but even if you didn't, the policies themselves become that passive income source. So it's really, really powerful when you see the whole picture.
Yeah. Hey, we're getting ready to go into the passive income phase here and start unloading some of these policies. We're going to bless our children even a little more.
If you're looking for people to hand off, I know a guy.
Yeah.
So just let me know.
No, we don't. I'm not. We don't believe in that life settlement stuff. No, 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 no. I'm talking about change of ownership. Um, so I mean, that's a great story, and about the Wells Fargo piece, because obviously you're qualified to understand how the inner workings of these banks. Most people don't understand. If I have a mortgage on a house and I'm paying 5%, is that really 5%? Number one. And number two is, isn't the tax deduction more important uh, than not getting it? I mean, all that stuff, those are typical arguments. What kind of arguments did you run into when it's all about policy loans versus conventional loans and whatnot?
Well, I think that was so impactful to me early on, is because, banks, I remember I said, do as they do, not as they say. Banks historically always discount the interest rate on something that benefits them, not you. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Well, what's the interest rate on a 30-year mortgage? Let's say today it's, 7%. I don't know. What's it on a 15-year mortgage? 6%. Wonder why it's discounted when it's a different term. Well, most people would say, well, that's just because I'm taking on a little bit higher payment, and so they're going to discount it to help me because I'm going to pay it off faster. Wrong answer, right? The bank wants more of your cash flow today because your dollars are worth more to them today than they will be 30 years from now. So they want to incentivize you to take on a higher payment because that helps them. They can now take those dollars and turn them around that much faster. They're creating velocity with your money. So this is do as they do, not as they say. You brought up the question, is 5% really 5%? Well, that's the kicker, is most people only focus on the interest rate. And you can say, well, I can have a 5% loan. This is just off the cuff, so it's probably not going to be perfect math, but just bear with me. If you have a loan, let's say you're buying a car, okay? You go and buy a car, someone would say, well, the interest rate is 5%. Well, what does that actually tell you? It tells you nothing, right? Because how fast that car needs to be paid back, the terms behind it dictate the whole story. Because if it's a 1-year loan at 5%, then what's my payment? It's drastically more per month than maybe what my budget would, be able to do anyway. So does that actually help me by knowing the interest rate? No, I need to know what the actual terms are. And I'll be honest, one of the very first things that was a challenge for me with infinite banking was getting my head to think bigger and more broadly about what is the actual process that's happening in my life, the banking process, versus only talking about interest rate or only talking about terms, because that is what, again, that's what Wall Street and big banks want you to do, is focus in on just one aspect and potentially be giving away your freedom and your cash flow unnecessarily. So anyways, I think, because people will get into the math like, well, what is there arbitrage between the loan rate at the insurance company, and would I get a better ROI if I did this and this? And Nelson's book is so good when he talks about the rate of interest versus the volume, right? Talking about a shot, right? The rate at which you get it versus the volume. Which one is more important? It's the volume. One, too little, it's going to not be effective. Too much, it'll kill you. So let's focus on that, and let's make our system as big as possible to take on the volume of activities in our lives that are going to require banking, instead of focusing on this little, unnecessary aspect of the interest rate. So that was a mindset shift for me. And I think one of the hardest things that clients that come work with us is they have to get over that. Like that's a brain shift. And, Nelson was the master of how you think. And it was frustrating at times, be honest. as I was interacting with Nelson, and you can stop me if I keep going too much here, but I always tell people, what was it like to be with Nelson? I was like, it was a lot like what I imagine the disciples were with Jesus. If you read the Bible, there's all these conversations where the disciples ask Jesus a question, and Jesus never gives them an answer. Never a direct answer. It was always a story. It was always an analogy or, a parable. And I mean, there were times I would just be like, Nelson, how did you specifically set up the policy for blah, 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 whatever it was? How did you help people understand, how the loan function worked or whatever? And he would just be like, first of all, he's always holding coffee in my office. He never drank the coffee. He would just hold it, and he would put it to his lips, and then he'd pull it back away. The coffee was cold 100% of the time because he never drank it. But he would always then go into a story. And if I'm being honest, it would frustrate the fire out of me because I'm like, all I want is the simple answer. I'm just like, it's like a here now, like, just give me the answer. But what he did is he was brilliant to say that this is not a black and white process that has a right or a wrong. He wanted me to think. He wanted me to change my thinking. And if you're stuck in the financial prison that 99% of people are, you're not getting anywhere. You can't just buy a different financial instrument to change the polarity. You have to change your thinking so that you can then align to get to your end goal. And Nelson knew that better than anybody. And, I just keep replaying stories and like conversations that we had. And again, like I said, at times I was frustrated, but afterwards I looked back and thought, okay, he was in a sense discipling me. He was helping me to not get caught up on the things that don't matter, but to think about the volume and the big picture of what is actually happening so that I can have confidence to move forward and make real change.
Yeah. But that's a great point that you captured Nelson's essence beautifully. Yeah, I witnessed that time and time again. And there's the old adage, you meet people where they're at, right? And so Nelson learned early when to play that card and when not to, because I sometimes to my chagrin and to my, detriment, I would kind of force him in different scenarios to do his thing. And he knew it was the wrong time and the wrong audience. And it was typically at a home office in a boardroom with senior insurance hired help. And boy, that did not work. And I, and it was like, oh no, here it comes. I mean, I guess I don't know if I'm making sense or not, but when it was on the right terms and conditions with the right person like you, it was beautiful. But if it was in a scenario like that, it's like, oh my, who is this guy? What's he talking about? Where's he coming from?
Well, he would come into our office and this is later in his life, especially closer to his passing. And I'm not talking, there's some people that would just drop you, hey, I've been reading this book and you ought to check it out. It's been really impactful. I'm talking stacks of books. Like there's no possible way. This is 10 years ago, 5 to 10 years ago. I still could not have read all the ones that he's dropped off if I was reading nonstop, but just stacks and stacks because he was pouring into me in a way that was scalable. Like he knew there wasn't going to be hours and hours and hours to meet with me individually. He was just, as those times where we were together, he was just constantly like, again, making me think and then equipping me with other things that would help me, down the road. one of the most impactful things that he ever did, which again, kind of like shocked me and drew me more into what, the man that he was, is really closely. This is probably 3 years before he passed. He came in and he just started showing me all of his policies. And he had a document. I can't recall what format. It was just like a Word document, if I recall, that he's like, I'm training my wife to be a widow. And I don't know about you, but like that was the first time I'd ever heard someone use those words. Like, what does that even mean? Like that is a man who knows his role, who knows like the gravity of his role not being forever, and that there's a responsibility. There's not just this willy-nilly like, hey, well, she'll figure it out or it's someone else's problem. It's like, I'm going to take responsibility for this. And I'm going to take even all the knowledge that I have. There may not be time to pass all of that along, but there's some mechanics of how this all is going to work after the fact that I need my wife to understand, because I'm not going to be here forever. And I just remember being very deeply impacted, and that really kind of changed the way I even lead at my house, with my family, with my kids. And so I'm just really, indebted, lots of gratitude that Nelson would take that time and emphasis with me, even though I probably didn't appreciate it enough at the time. And even at the end of his life, I was compelled. There was a time where he fell before he ended up passing. It was like shortly before. I'm sure you guys recall. And my daughter was with me, and they told me he's at the hospital and it's okay for you. Like, it's not just family or whatever that can come. And I was like, I want you to meet my mentor, And so here's my daughter. I don't recall. She's probably 12 at the time or something like that. Maybe she's 18 now, so I don't recall exactly what time frame. But I just got to introduce her to Nelson. She didn't get to see all the things that I got to see, but it's cool to hear her after the fact talk about that experience. And she could tell that was a special man. Not just to me, but to others, because he didn't know her from Adam. He just knew she was my daughter, and he just locked in talking to her and sharing with her and joking with her. And we were supposed to be there, ministering to him. So anyways, just some of the cool memories and stories that I have of Nelson.
Yeah, he was the kind of guy that would, when he met somebody, he gave him his full attention. It wasn't just some cursory, being nice. It was like he really wanted to figure out, who you were, where you're at, and get to know you, and then become a lifelong friend. So I mean, he uses Rolodex daily, to keep in contact with everybody. So yeah.
Okay, let's talk about how the infinite banking concept, you've shared how it has personally impacted you and your life and your family. What about some of your clients? Do you have any, stories where it really changed your client's life for generations? Anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Almost daily, we have people who are starting this process, and they have a goal in mind, right? They are kind of where I was, but they didn't realize that there was an alternative to the Wall Street plans that are out there. And one gentleman was an endodontist who came to us, and he had locked all of his money up in all these retirement type plans. And he recognized that this was a powerful process that could not only give him access to money today, where he can invest in his practice, which would expand his ability to earn his active income. It also then translated into, he was at that point where his kids were adults, and he was able to partner with them on certain businesses that then their families were impacted, to be able to create active income and even potentially some passive income assets that they have together. And he started having these like annual retreats with the family to talk about all these, this system of family banking that was occurring. And, it's a slow process. It's something that takes time, but he would just report back to us over and over, like, this is how this is happening. And, when you talk about that kind of experience and generational impact, as we all know, like, that's not going to stop anytime soon. That's going to be hundreds of years in the making, that this system he's the patriarch of is going to continue to pay dividends, no pun intended, for generations. Compare that to what his alternative was, right? To stay on the same path, have his own retirement, not even be secure, but to, like, that's his only focus. Well, which one is going to produce joy at the highest level? Which one is going to produce impact at the highest level? Our CPAs have told us over and over, the worst vehicle to pass on wealth in an estate isn't a qualified plan. So as these people are building their whole foundation on their qualified plans, and this is going to take care of them in retirement, it's such a small picture of what's possible. If we reallocate the dollars that we would be putting into something like that, into a system like what this gentleman was able to build, it's profound, the impact. It's not even just about dollars and cents at that time. It's about a richness that you just can't imagine. I think about, that's like one example, or one extreme, if you will, all the way down to the guy who's an excavator, right? He's working in a family business, and this is what he does, and he makes a good living. But he knew that his goal was that his wife was a nurse. They had a young family, and she's being pulled, wanting to be a stay-at-home mom. She wants to be with the kids and educate them and all this sort of stuff. And he comes and he's like, I don't understand all this, but I want to get started. And this seems like a great way to start. He starts his first policy. He starts a second policy, and he really didn't have anything to do with it, but he knew that was his end goal. Well, he gets into a snowmobile accident on the side of a mountain in Utah where he's broken his leg. He can't get up. He's just waiting to be airlifted in the snow. He's just laying there in snow, right? And he told me, he's like, I had been listening to your podcast, and I got into this, like, I really think I wanted to start doing this land flipping stuff, like taking raw land and turning it into owner finance notes. And he's like, and I sat there and I thought, if I don't make a change, I'm the only asset at work. And now I may not even be able to work for a while because my leg is broken. And, driving an excavator with a broken leg is probably not the easiest thing in the world. I don't know. I've never done it. So, correct me if I'm wrong. But he's sitting there and he's like, something's got to change. And so that was like the catalyst. He started doing this land flipping thing. Within 18 to 24 months, the guy's got like $15,000 a month coming in, working very, very part-time in this land flipping thing. Well, his wife can come home now. She's no longer a nurse. She's working at home, and they've now since had multiple kids. Now that land business is far more than what he's been making in the excavation business in the family. And he's just choosing to do the excavation business, but he didn't have to, right? He went from a have to a want to. And I think that's where a lot of people are today, is they just need a path. They need an on-ramp into financial freedom. And it's not an overnight thing, but man, within a relatively short amount of time, you can make a drastic change to both your present and your future. I mean, that guy who's an excavator, he has now policies on all of his kids. And I just see the beginnings of what we've talked about with that endodontist and everybody in between. Like, this is a massive generational shift that's taking place before our eyes. And he just needed that one on-ramp. IBC was the on-ramp that got him to a position to saying, I now have money in my possession. It's in my control. And we had a guest on our podcast say this one time, and I always give him credit. He said, once it got to that point, once the money got into my IBC system, it asked me, what do you want to do with it? Right? It begged the question, what are you going to invest it? What are you going to do with this money now that you have it? Because before, when it's in qualified plans, when it's in the equity in your home, when it's in, IRAs, 529 plans, you pick the alphabet soup. You don't have that creativity. You shut it off because you don't have to think about it. But man, that's where the infinite in infinite banking comes in, because I see people apply it to all sorts of amazing ideas and passive income opportunities every single day. So I could go on and on about a bunch of stories, but that to me is like a really good summation of how I've seen other people apply it.
Yeah, it sounds like full circle back to the human condition again. The golden rule. How do you think? It goes right back to that. That's the intrinsic value of IBC, I think. It's not about comparing these different assets and instruments.
Well, as we wrap up today, Joey, I just want to ask you, what does the infinite banking concept mean to you?
I think for me, I just sum it up with one word, and that's freedom, right? Freedom was always what Nelson was after. He had actually a really, really big call to the 10%, right? To free the banking industry, right? To free people from kind of the enslavement that they're in. But as I apply it just in my small way of thinking, probably comparatively, it's just that on-ramp to freedom. It gives me now access. It gives me the ability to create or to dream about what's possible. And then from there, I can take really calculated steps towards what that freedom is. We're not guaranteed tomorrow, right? So this idea of retirement when I'm in my 60s is a hope at best. Why don't we start instead taking control today and maximizing the time that we do have? And this system, the infinite banking concept, is the only system, in my opinion, that gives you the pathway to do that, to accomplish that.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Joey, for being with us. We appreciate it.